One of the most popular pocket pistols in Germany was the Mauser Model 1914, a striker-fired blowback 25 ACP. It was updated in 1934 and sadly is associated with the odious Nazi regime.
At the tail end of the 19th century, there were a number of semi-automatic handgun designs emerging, and one of the iconic designs that we see right around the turn of the century is from Mauser, and that is the C96. After Mauser developed the iconic C96, they started looking at some other different action designs and different concepts, and one of the things that Mauser wanted to develop was just a simple blowback actuated design. Mauser tasked an engineer named Joseph Nickel to develop what would eventually become a family of handguns. Interestingly enough, the original goal of Joseph Nickel was to develop a blowback mechanism that would work with a 9mm cartridge, and that ended up being a failure. They just could not make the blowback mechanism work with the 9mm cartridge because it was simply too powerful. But what they did find was that the blowback mechanism that Nickel developed in these prototype 9mm stages actually worked really well for some of the smaller handgun cartridges that were popular at the time.
Among Mauser pistol collectors, the terms are used of Model 1910 and Model 1914, but these are really just made up nomenclature so collectors can tell them apart. In actuality, when Mauser developed this style of pistol in the early 20th century, they simply referred to it by the caliber. Now you had the first one that came out was a 25 ACP, and this actually came out long before 1910, like 1906, and by 1908 they're already in America. And based on that frame, then the decision was, well, we'll up-step this gun to a 32 ACP. And the result was what collectors call the Model 1914. It's really a handy little pistol.
32 ACP in Europe was looked upon as a serious round. Today, we think, oh, well, they're in sea camps and tomcats and that sort of thing. But according to most of Europe, this was a military and police round. 32 ACP was serious business for them. The guns were purchased by civilians. Also, the German military, Imperial Germany, acquired some. And Mauser continued to make these guns all the way into the 1930s. And in 1934, they decided it was time to give this thing something of a facelift. Some of it was to make manufacture a little easier, to make the parts a little more robust and just not as difficult to make.
The Model 1914 Mauser has a couple of interesting features that we think of as really unique. They were interesting features at the time, and this of course was a period when different designers and different companies were experimenting with different mechanisms and aspects of ergonomics in a handgun. You'll notice that the slide serrations are actually kind of bowed out and have this rounded profile so that you can actually get your fingers on the slide to rack the mechanism and get a good grip on the gun. The other thing that's really unique about the Model 1914 Mauser is that the controls on the left side of the grip frame, they look like controls you would see on a handgun today, but they actually perform different functions. So there's a lever on the side of the gun that you actually have to sweep down with your thumb, and that's what puts the gun on safe. And just below that lever, there's actually a push button that looks like a magazine release on modern day handguns. And in fact, it has nothing to do with the magazine at all. That is actually what you have to push in order to make the gun ready to fire. Releasing the magazine involves working with a traditional heel type release, as is typically found on handguns of this period. So you actually have to, use your thumb to push the heel back at the rear of the frame and then pull the magazine out.
The 1934, well, the grips are a little bit more ergonomic than the 1914 model. And sometimes it's hard to figure the two out, when you're looking at them in a gun show or in a collection, and you forget, all right, which one had the, you got to kind of go back and forth is to figure out which one was which. But, if you're collecting World War I sidearms, the 1914 is a must-have on your list. And for World War II, again, the 1934 is a must-have. They just don't have they haven't captured the romantic, imagination of gun writers or even, filmmakers.
The little 1934s, the Beerwaffenamps, depending on, to which entity they were issued, bring a little more value than the ones that do not. As far as a fun shooting little gun, as a matter of fact, it was the first auto pistol like that I ever purchased was a 1934, and I fired the heck out of it when I was a kid. I wouldn't feel underarmed if I wanted to carry a 32 for a pocket piece. I still consider it a very, very, very practical, viable little pistol.